Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. Urban explorers of internet, what is your creepiest, most horrifying experience? Story 1. Not alone.
I went to an abandoned hospital. There was a large square staircase spiraling up to the roof on the outside of the building, with a locked steel door at the bottom. The only way up was to climb on the outside to the first landing. My buddy boosted me up. I climbed over, and I saw a sleeping bag with a steak knife lying next to it on the landing. I called down, "We are definitely not alone here, dude." "No, but it is fine," says a voice behind me, startling me and causing me to jump and turn around. There was a young, unkempt man standing there, coming down the stairs from above, with his hands up and palms out. I did not mean to scare you. He took a seat on the stairs, so I carefully stepped on the handle of the steak knife, leaned over the edge, and pulled my friend up. We had planned to sit on the roof and drink some beverages, so we offered the man one, which he gratefully accepted. We started talking on the landing for a while, discussing the city, law enforcement, traveling, and life in general. He was essentially a drifter, only in town for about a week, but seemed like a nice enough guy. Things were going well until he asked, "You guys are human, right? I really dislike meeting people who turn out to be aliens. You never know until you peel their skin off. They have been after me for a long time, you know. They do not stop, they never stop. Sometimes I think I should just get rid of everyone to be safe." He was definitely not joking, and there was an uncomfortable silence as my friend and I realized this man was likely not in a stable mental state. "Yeah, man," I said, "we are human. We just wanted to check out the place and relax for a bit. We are going to go ahead and move on now. We definitely do not want any trouble." He just stared in silence, so we left him the last beverage, carefully backed up to the railing, jumped down, and walked away very quickly, constantly looking back over our shoulders. The entire time he stood there, completely still and silent, watching us leave. That place is still abandoned 5 years later, and we have never been back. I am not a believer in the supernatural, but people can be deceptive and dangerous in ways you cannot see coming.
Story 2. Echoes of Terror.
A few years ago, my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned asylum or mental hospital in the Oklahoma City metro area. It was late at night, which was probably not the smartest idea for a group of naive college freshmen. The place was incredibly eerie, with its broken windows and dark hallways, but we were excited to experience something thrilling. The only way inside was through a shattered window, so we carefully climbed in and began exploring. We were all gathered near the window, joking around and taking our time in the darkness, when suddenly we heard loud, echoing footsteps running toward us from down the hallway. The sound filled the empty space, and we froze. We all exchanged nervous glances, silently asking, "Who is not here? Who is playing a prank?" After a quick head count, we realized everyone was accounted for, and no one was sprinting down that dark hallway. Panic set in, and without a second thought, we bolted out the way we came. Despite the first scare, we returned to the asylum another night. This time we heard what sounded like people moving around, jumping from behind corners and trying to mess with us. At first we assumed it was an animal, but when we gathered the courage to investigate, we realized it was a group of people. We managed to approach them and saw a collection of individuals who appeared to be in their 20s. They looked disheveled and unsteady, as though they might have been under the influence of something. They began begging us for cans of paint and cigarette. That was when we got a very uneasy feeling. Something about them did not sit right. As we tried to leave, the leader of their group stopped us and asked if we had any jewelry. We denied having anything, and then he said something that still sends chills down my spine. "I like jewelry. I take it off the girls here when they sleep." At that point, we did not hesitate. We turned and ran as fast as we could, never looking back. To this day, we have never returned to that asylum.
Story 3. Voices in the Dark.
When we were kids, around 12 years old, my friends and I decided to explore an underground flood channel. It was one of those adventures born out of boredom and curiosity, the kind that seemed thrilling and harmless at the time. The flood channel was dark and damp, and the air was thick with an unsettling stillness. There were spots where we could climb up and dangle our arms out of the storm drains on the street above, but doing so required crawling up strange diagonal tunnels. That part was tricky but added to the excitement. There were 4 of us, and we only had one flashlight to share. The walls of the channel were covered in graffiti, gang symbols, crude drawings, and ominous warnings to turn back. We laughed it off, assuming it was just other kids trying to scare people like us. At one point, we reached an area where the ceiling sloped down so low that the opening became incredibly narrow. The only way forward was to crawl through a tight, cramped space. Naturally, being adventurous kids, we saw it as a challenge and decided to push on. The crawl was only about 5 or 6 feet, but it felt much longer. When we emerged on the other side, the tunnel opened up into a large, round concrete pipe. It was different from the rectangular channels we had been in before. The space felt vast but eerily empty. The graffiti was still there, covering the walls, but now it seemed more chaotic and unsettling. We began yelling, testing the echoes, and laughing at how our voices bounced back at us. That was when we thought we heard something, a faint sound coming from deeper in the darkness. We immediately fell silent, straining to listen. Then, out of nowhere, a loud, menacing voice echoed the tunnel. "You are going to die." The voice boomed, amplified by the pipe, and it froze us in place. The boy holding the flashlight panicked and bolted, running as fast as he could back the way we came. The rest of us were left behind, plunged into absolute darkness. We stood there for a moment, too scared to move, before realizing we had no choice but to find our way out in the pitch black. Slowly and quietly, we began feeling our way along the damp walls, retracing our steps. Eventually we made it out, but that was the last time any of us ever went into that flood channel. To this day, none of us can explain who or what yelled at us from the darkness. All I know is that I will never forget the sheer terror of that moment.
Story 4. Abandoned Hospital.
It all started as part of a photography project I was working on. There is a massive forest up a mountain near where I live, and within that forest lies an abandoned hospital. The hospital has a dark history. It was shut down after an unexplained death. This is not just an urban legend. The story is documented in the news. The day was overcast and gloomy, the kind of weather that adds an extra chill to the air. I packed my camera and lunch determined to explore the woods and capture some atmospheric shots. After a few hours of wandering, I stumbled upon a small camp. It looked as though it had been hastily abandoned, with scattered tools lying around. Among them was a massive pair of bolt cutters, half melted as though someone had tried to destroy them in a fire but failed. Not far from the camp, perhaps 200 or 300 meters, I came across a burned-out car. While not uncommon in this area, where abandoned vehicles are often vandalized, it still made me pause. The car's charred frame stood out starkly against the dense greenery, an ominous reminder of human presence in these isolated woods. But the real unease began just beyond the car. A few steps away, I found a pair of women's jeans lying in the dirt. Nearby, maybe 5 meters further, there was a pair of underwear hanging from a low branch. They had clearly been there for some time, exposed to Ireland's harsh weather. The fabric was damp and discolored, suggesting weeks of exposure to the elements. Standing there alone, surrounded by silence, I felt a creeping dread. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this just litter, or was there something more sinister at play? I flipped through local news after returning home, searching for any reports of break-ins, assaults, or missing persons in the area. Strangely, I found nothing recent or relevant. As a precaution, I contacted the police and shared what I had found. Their response was disheartening. They dismissed it as mere littering, claiming there was no evidence of a crime. Still, the scene I stumbled upon that day has never left my mind. Sometimes it is not the supernatural that scares us the most, but the unexplained traces of human activity that leave us with unanswered questions.
Story 5. Abandoned Mental Hospital.
A group of friends and I decided to explore a closed mental hospital in our city late at night. The place had been abandoned for years, and we were curious to see what was left inside. We ventured through the empty hallways, the only sound being the echo of our footsteps. Everything seemed quiet at first, but that changed when we reached the basement. The basement was dark and eerie, but it had long lit tunnels stretching in both directions. These tunnels were wide, about 5 meters across, and had ceilings that were at least 4 meters high. We chose one direction and walked down the tunnel, our flashlights casting strange shadows across the walls. After walking for a while, we stumbled upon a massive active generator. It hummed loudly in the silence, the only sign of life in the entire building. We decided to explore the other direction, eager to see what else the basement held. As we walked further down the tunnel, we approached an intersection. That's when we saw them. At the far end of the corridor, 2 men in full green attire and face masks were walking toward us. It was already 2 a.m., and the sight of these strangers in the depths of an abandoned hospital was unsettling to say the least. We froze for a moment, unsure of what to do, but the air felt thick with unease. There was no explanation for why they were there, and the masks only added to the mystery. Without saying a word, we turned and bolted back the way we came. Our hearts were pounding as we rushed up the dark tunnels, not stopping until we were back outside. That night, we learned that some places are better left unexplored.
Story 6. The Dark Factory.
My friends and I used to explore this old abandoned factory or processing plant. We never could figure out exactly what it had been, but the whole place had an unsettling vibe. The factory had several underground sections, and these were pitch black, even just a few meters from the entrance. To get down into the deeper parts, we had to navigate a steep flight of stairs, which made the whole experience feel even more claustrophobic and ominous. One time we ventured 2 or 3 levels down and stumbled upon a burned-out car. It was so out of place, and we couldn't even begin to imagine how it had ended up there. It gave off a strange, eerie feeling, as if it had been abandoned for a reason. We didn't stay long, but the image of that charred vehicle stuck with us. On another trip, we made a crucial mistake. We forgot to bring flashlights. We were too excited to explore and thought we could rely on a few lighters we had in our pockets. In the darkness, we found a deep hole in the ground. We couldn't resist investigating, so we stuck a branch in the hole to test how deep it went. To our shock, it went at least 6 feet down, and we quickly realized the hole was filled with some kind of liquid. In that pitch-black environment, if any of us had fallen in, we could have easily drowned without anyone knowing where we were. But the most terrifying experience happened when we went even deeper into the factory. We were a couple of levels down when suddenly one of our group members, who was at the bottom of a stairwell, screamed. It was the kind of scream that cuts through the air and makes your blood run cold. The rest of us panicked, thinking someone was being attacked. We all began running, heart pounding, trying to get out of the factory. There was a thick, slimy sludge on the ground, making it difficult to keep our footing. We slipped and slid, our limbs completely out of control, as we scrambled to escape. The air was filled with screams and the pounding of our hearts, and for a moment, it felt like we were trapped in a nightmare, with every step leading us closer to whatever danger lurked in the dark. In the end, the truth was much less sinister. It turned out that a bird had made a nest in the darkness, and my sister had been spooked by it. My friend, already on edge, screamed in fear, and that's when the chaos erupted. We had all thought we were moments away from disaster, but in reality, it was just a bird's nest and a little bit of panic. Still, the terror we felt that night felt all too real.
Story 7. Trapped in an abandoned hotel.
I was exploring an abandoned hotel, and the moment I entered through a shattered window near the indoor pool, I was hit with an overpowering smell, something like decay, something unnatural. As I ventured deeper into the building, I discovered the cause: 2 bloated deer trapped in the stagnant slime at the deep end of the pool. The sight was unsettling, a clear sign that I probably should have turned around right then, but curiosity got the better of me. I moved into the lobby and banquet areas, where I came across a couple of raccoons and squirrels. They quickly scurried away, but the eerie stillness of the hotel persisted. Everything was in ruins. Even the reception desk had been torn in half. There was nothing here of interest, just trash, odd little piles of discarded debris, as if someone had tried to make sense of the chaos. After a while of searching, I found the stairwell. There was a strange noise coming from above, but I assumed it was just the rain. Skipping a couple of floors, expecting them to be in the same dismal state as the lobby, I finally reached the 4th floor. I pushed the door open, not worried about the noise. I assumed I was the only one around. But as soon as the door creaked open, the rain noise abruptly stopped. Everything went silent. My flashlight swept the hallway, and I froze. Hundreds of geese, their heads poking out from the guest rooms, were staring at me. The moment felt like it lasted forever, though I'm sure it was only about 10 seconds. Then, the realization hit me this wasn't the whole floor. There were geese behind me, and they weren't just watching. They were coming for me. Panic set in. I quickly slammed the stairwell door behind me, muffling the cacophony that erupted as the birds began to move. My mind raced as I sprinted down the stairs. The signs had been there all along, goose droppings scattered everywhere. When I hit the lobby, I turned toward the pool area, only to see a group of geese gathered, seemingly blocking my way. They weren't the sharpest creatures though, so I managed to slip past them. When I finally made it outside, the sight waiting for me was even more surreal. The entire exterior of the hotel was swarming with geese, a maddening sea of them. And on the roof, a lone sentinel stood watch, honking in sharp, urgent calls, warning the others that the perimeter had been breached. It felt like the birds were hunting me.
Story 8. Eyes in the Dark.
I live in a large city in Africa, one that still holds vast, undeveloped spaces where nature creeps back in. It's a rule I've learned to follow. There's always someone else there, someone you might not see, yet they are always watching. These people are not obvious. They are the ones who sit alone, quietly hidden in the bushes, between boulders, or tucked into dark corners of forgotten paths. I have encountered them on countless occasions over the past 10 years, and their presence is always a mystery. They never speak, never approach, and always seem to be waiting. There's something off about them. They are usually dressed well, far too well to be homeless, their clothes neat and untouched by the dirt of the surroundings. Yet, despite this, there they are, sitting perfectly still, their eyes fixed on you. They never hide the fact that they are watching. Instead, their gaze is direct and unsettling. It's as if they are silently observing every move you make, waiting for something, though I have no idea what that might be. The oddest part is that, despite their stillness, I have never seen them move. I could walk past them for hours, and when I glance back, they are exactly where I left them, unmoving, eyes locked onto mine. It's not just an occasional occurrence. It's constant, everywhere I go. I swear, if there were a hidden cave high in the cliffs, completely unreachable without professional climbing gear, these people would still find a way in. They would be there waiting, with no discernible way of having gotten there. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I've learned to keep my distance. Every time I see one of them, I feel a cold shiver run down my spine, the unsettling sensation that I am not as alone as I thought. And it's this thought that haunts me. What exactly are they watching for?
Story 9. Uncovering Secrets.
When I was in college, a few friends and I decided to explore an old, abandoned hotel in our area. It was once a luxurious spot in the 1950s, but it had been sitting vacant and fenced off for years. One afternoon we were walking by and noticed a second-story window that was slightly open, and just beside it, we found an old wooden ladder resting against the building. Curiosity got the better of us, so we decided to climb up and see what was inside. We entered the building and immediately noticed how run down it was. The entire place was covered in graffiti, and the floors were littered with trash. The once glamorous hotel had fallen into a sad state of disrepair, with pieces of the building crumbling away. We carefully made our way up the staircase to the 3rd floor, checking out each room we passed. This area of the hotel had once housed the staff, and the 3rd floor was a graveyard of garbage and forgotten memories, with remnants of the past scattered everywhere. We reached the last room on the 3rd floor, and that's when things got weird. As we peered inside, we saw something that made our blood run cold, a single lit candle, flickering in the middle of the room with no one else around. It was unsettling, to say the least. We didn't know what to think. Who would leave a candle burning in an abandoned building? It didn't make sense. The feeling of being watched washed over us. We quickly realized that we were not alone, and the hairs on the back of our necks stood up. In a panic, we hurriedly ran out of the room and down the stairs. As we exited the building and looked up at the windows, we froze. Someone was standing at one of the windows, staring down at us. Our hearts raced. It could have been a homeless person, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was too quiet, too eerie. We had to get out of there. We later learned that the hotel had been sealed off after a previous explorer fell down an open elevator shaft and broke his legs. It was eventually cemented up, and now the building is being renovated into apartments. While this wasn't the creepiest thing we had ever encountered, the experience stuck with us. The feeling of being watched, the mysterious candle, and the unanswered questions about who or what was in that building with us left an impression that we couldn't shake.
Story 10. Creepy Ritual.
This happened 8 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. My urban exploration friends and I were on a bike ride, looking for cool places to explore in a relatively dilapidated area, when we discovered a really creepy cave, an old abandoned cement mine, we later learned. We did some mild exploring that first day, but quickly realized it would require more gear to thoroughly explore: flashlights, respirators, etc. About a week later, 5 of us came back with the proper gear and a camera to see what we could find in the mine. We discovered there was basically one main shaft that sloped downward and deeper into the earth, so we followed that main route. It was wide enough for a car to drive down and was pretty well graded, so the walking was easy. There were many rooms, old machinery, and rusting equipment off of this main shaft, but we mostly avoided it in the beginning. We were trying not to get lost or confused. Along the way, the walls were littered with the classic abandoned graffiti. X was here, swastikas, initials and dates, phallic drawings, etc. As we got deeper and deeper though, the graffiti really thinned out. At this point, the light from the entrance was long gone, and we were relying solely on flashlights. The air was so stagnant and hazy with particles that the light from our flimsy flashlights would only go 20 feet or so before getting totally obscured by dust. Thank goodness for the respirators. The glow sticks we had brought to mark our way to prevent getting lost were also basically useless, because they would disappear in the haze only a few steps after dropping them, and we had only brought 10 or so. At this point, we started arguing among ourselves. Several of the crew were nervous about going any deeper with the air quality being so terrible. And without a good way to prevent us from getting lost, we were probably a quarter mile into the earth now. The rest of us managed to override that sentiment of fear by assuring them that the path was easy and straightforward, so we'd have to try to get lost. We were going to rely on our level-headedness, sense of direction, and flashlight battery life to get out. Despite the agreement to push on, it was becoming very creepy for everyone. We walked for a while, in silence, hearing nothing but our own movements and the steady drip of water coming from somewhere deep in the cave. I think we were all pretty scared at this point, but no longer willing to admit it to each other. Then we stumbled across something that made us all stop cold. Dug into the side of the deep stone shaft we were slowly descending was a tunnel, an offshoot. It was narrow, you'd have to crouch to go through it. And it was also a good few feet off the ground, so it required a scramble to reach it. But that wasn't what made us stop. It was the graffiti. We hadn't seen any for 10 minutes or so, and had assumed the artists never came this deep. But someone else clearly had, and the message they left was ominous. The tunnel was lined with words written in white, all of them somehow relating to death and destruction. Scrawled throughout the tunnel were words like suffering, pain, plague, disease, and hell. It was pretty terrifying. Who else would come this far just to write such a terrible message in a mysterious tunnel that broke from the main path? But there was no turning back now. We had to see where the tunnel led. Despite our fear, we were overpowered by intense curiosity. So one by one, we crawled through the tunnel to the other side. What we found was a strange flooded chamber. Around the pool of water were many large stones, each covered with dozens of burned-out tea candles. There must have been hundreds of used tea candles in the place. The walls had a few creepy monster faces poorly graffitied on them, and the tunnel entrance back to the main shaft was ringed with a spray-painted blood-stained mouth. What was this place? Some weird ritual site for local Satan worshippers? An elaborate hoax set up by a bunch of kids? We couldn't find much evidence to figure it all out, and we were running out of adrenaline to keep exploring. We all crawled out of that weird, hellish hole and back into the main shaft, where we promptly headed toward the exit. When we finally saw that pinprick of natural light coming from the real world outside, we were flooded with relief. We never did figure out what that mysterious cavern was for, and I think I'm content to leave it a mystery. No, we didn't hear any monsters in the depths of the tunnel, or find any bloody Satan worshippers themselves. But just finding that room buried deep in an old forgotten mine was enough to creep all of us out for a long time.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.